This is something that's been plaguing me. I don't know what to make of it. So you have the long years of the Sumerian kings list. There's a whole bunch of different kings lists,
Yep.
and then you also have the Genesis, which is
Hmm.
not anywhere close as long, but still very long. And it just happens in both of these stories and maybe a couple other texts that there also just happens to be a flood, and then in the flood it just happens that the years start to drop off. Your explanation in this was basically the symbolism of these years is this is a past time, like a primordial time of, like, this is just a long, long time ago, basically. Not that they were associating, maybe, I don't know, where they weren't associating with, like these were literally how long they lived. Um, is is that what you were trying to say? And maybe you could explain like how you got there and your reasoning.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is roughly what I'm saying. Again, this is similar to the time kind of discussion.
Oh,
This
sure.
is another area where the use of numbers, right, especially in these mythological type texts, is it's just different in terms of what we're used to. They're not using them with the same level of precision, but they are imputing a different layer of symbolism to them. So I think whatever other significance the specific numbers would have, and that I don't really get into in the course, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm frankly, I don't have all the answers, but why the numbers are specifically that way, in whether in the Sumerian king list or in the book of Genesis, it's clear enough to me that there's a kind of grammar of numbers where the bigger numbers, the longer years, is a way of talking about distant antiquity. So in the Sumerian king list, it says a list of, for viewers who don't know, it's an ancient Sumerian, Mesopotamian text giving dynasties of kings from the beginnings of kingship. There's a flood, and then there's more kings organized into dynasties. And the first few dynasties are kings with tens of thousands of years, right, of reign, 24,800 or whatever the numbers are, right? Just like impossibly long reigns. Um, Whatever else those years represent, I think the lengths of numbers are a way of talking about deep past, right? Like it's almost like a magnifying glass, or I don't know what the image is. Like you look deep in the past, and like things are bigger, grander, right? Um, the flood, both in Mesopotamia and in the Bible, is a demarcation of primordial time and like our present age, if you will, right? It's a kind of separation. So the years become more realistic, right? They're smaller after the flood. So in the book of Genesis, the numbers go from hundreds, Methuselah 900 whatever years, in the genealogies, to more realistic numbers in later genealogies. You get a similar, at least, trend in the Sumerian king list, where it goes from tens of thousands of years to thousands of years, and then it's at a certain point later in the Sumerian king list, some scholars would actually see those as historical, years, like 24 years and 15 years for this king and 5 years for that king,
Hmm.
when it's closer to the time of the person writing the text.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, so I mean, this doesn't quite answer the question of why those numbers are
Yeah.
exactly the way they are, but I do think that that pattern of like big numbers are a way of talking about long, long time ago, like primeval time, is it's a kind of clear pattern, and a kind of symbolic cue, right? That was probably implicit and would have been um, assumed, right, by an ancient reader.
Hmm.
And it's different from the way we use numbers.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting though, because in the Genesis account, you still have people living somewhat long.
Yeah.
even like Abraham 175.
Yeah.
Of course, Jacob and I think Joseph were 110, which just
Mm-hmm.
happens to be the symbolic, perfect
Right.
year in Egyptian.
Yeah.
Um, and but like all throughout those genealogies, it's still really long
Yeah.
compared to what we live today, and most certainly like what most people lived during that
Right.
time,
Yeah.
which was like ridiculously low amounts just because of medicine and all that.
Yeah. I mean, I would,
Yeah,
whatever I just said about the relative length, and after the flood, relatively they get shorter.
yeah,
That doesn't preclude other possible symbolic meanings of these
right.
numbers as well. So whether
Mhm.
110 has some other significance, I would be entirely open to that. There probably is other stuff going on in the numbers. So yeah, I mean, it's a it is a kind of complicated set of questions that is has not been fully answered
Yeah,
necessarily. But I think we do see kind of at least that general pattern.
yeah. So would you, in that case, would you say that like after Genesis 11 and onward, that's still kind of like back then, almost not primordial times, but
Mm-hmm.
like post-primordial times,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah, I
But
mean,
it's still
the
not
flood
today.
the flood is the biggest kind of demarcation, but it is, I mean, in a sense, like all the characters in Genesis are, early ancestors of Israel,
Mm,
right? They're early from the perspective of later Israel.
yeah.
So it may be just kind of a different level of antiquity, right? Like you have the primordial time and you have the patriarchs, the ancestors, which are kind of the next phase, if you will.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean, it could be kind of a multi-stage kind of thing, if you will. But again, the to I don't have a full explanation for every
Yeah.
single
Right.
number, obviously, but I do think that this general pattern of the larger numbers being a way of talking about antiquity. I mean, it shows up both in ancient Israel and ancient Mesopotamia. So it's I think a general pattern that we
Hmm.
can identify.